Thanks, Grant, for the intro. Happy to be here. It's my second year attending this. I was a newbie to CPAB when I attended last year's event, and I was going to say thanks for having us back, but they didn't really have me back because I wasn't speaking here last year. So we'll see how I do this week or today, and we'll see if they invite me back again. But anyway, so thanks for the invite. So working with regulators in a time of change. Title is self-explanatory. Brief agenda here. We'll do a quick introduction to CPAB, what we do in inspections, stakeholder engagement, and then when the group of us here got together in November to sort of plan out what do we think these people are going to be interested in if we try and, again, congratulations on packing your room this size again.
You're coming.
Yeah, well, no, I think it was because of you guys, but anyway. What are they going to be interested in? What's the buzz that we're hearing things about? Sorry, what's the buzz on the things we're hearing about? And Bitcoin, blockchain technology, emergence of the cannabis economy in Canada, or the industry in Canada. Those are a couple of the things that we figured people might be interested in. I'm going to say this for the rest of I won't say this anymore in the presentation, but treat Bitcoin as cryptocurrency. I've just chosen that as, facial tissue equals Kleenex. Kleenex is the brand we all know and love. I'm not sure whether Bitcoin will be the cryptocurrency brand, but just Bitcoin equals cryptocurrency. And there's a ton of them out there. Don't ask me to name any other ones than Bitcoin because the folks that did this presentation for me are in the audience and they aren't here to fill that information in my head now. So we'll get into the expanded auditors report a little bit. And then I think Grant set the ground rules for questions. So we'll do those at the end. I was going to say just shout out, but thanks to the gentleman who said speak into the mic. I appreciate that. If there are any questions that are burning and you can't write down, just go ahead and ask them and I'll try and answer. So inspections, what do we do at CPAB? A lot of what we do is around inspections. One of the things we've put into our strategy over the last couple of years, and we're going to be putting our foot on the gas a little bit harder on it, is around stakeholder engagement, stakeholder outreach. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but that isn't, that's sort of the, other than working with the great esteemed colleagues that I've come to know and love here at CPAB in Western Canada, my second favorite part of the job is stakeholder outreach, meeting with audit committee chairs, members of the management and preparer community for RIs. And so that's sort of a big piece of what we're focusing on now, but we also, again, we are an inspection shop as well. Some of the other organizations that we interact with, provincial institutes, exchanges, folks that are on the panel here. We are also heavily involved in IFER, which is the global sort of amalgam of audit regulators across the planet. Brian Hunt, who's our soon-to-be resigning CEO, he's stepping down from that role after doing it for I think 9 years. A year ago, he became the chair of IFER, so he's very much involved in IFER, and we are as well as a Canadian regulator. As I find typical for Canadians, especially when you think about our hockey teams and all the other things that compete on a national scale or a global scale, we tend to punch above our weight in that realm as well. So we're sort of within the top 5 of the regulators that contribute to that organization, even though we're a country of only sort of 30 million people with the capital markets of the size they are. So anyway, we're fairly proud of that. Map of Canada, couldn't do a presentation like this without it. You're all familiar with it. The reason we put this up here is just so you can get an idea of sort of what geography we cover. In CPAB's geographic universe, central Canada starts in Saskatchewan and moves into Ontario, with the east being Quebec and the Atlantic provinces, and my responsibility is for the west, which is Alberta and Vancouver. Just some data points around, we've got 3 offices, one in Montreal, one in Toronto. That's our head office. No one should be surprised by that. We've got 7 staff out here, 6 in Montreal, and about 40 or so folks in the center. And we don't get paid based on how many RIs we're responsible for. I wish we did, because if you look, we're responsible for 2,700 here in the West, and Toronto's got 4,300 there. But anyway, we're not going to get into that. Other than that, it's just a nice map of Canada, and we'll move on. So who do we engage with? I talked a little bit about stakeholder engagement. This is a slide that I presented to our board back in September when we had a strategy session around, what are we doing with this effort, and why is it important, and why aren't we just doing inspections as opposed to reaching out to audit committees, preparers, and folks like that. When you look at our mandate, we're trying to move up the curve from a regulatory perspective and not just inspect files. We want to add value as a regulator. And over the last couple of years, we've put into our strategy efforts around engaging with stakeholders. And when you look at the sort of the key stakeholders that have the highest impact on audit quality and sustained, consistent audit quality, it's really these three groups of people. And I realize we've only got one audit firm in the room here, so bear with me on that. And yes, they are kind of stuck with us because we regulate them and they have to register with us in order to do business, and they understand that very well. But the other folks that that are part of this are the audit committee members, and I would expand that to board directors that are on boards. Even though the audit committee is sort of the tip of the sword around audit, oversight. And the management team. And by management here, I'm going to use the term management and prepare interchangeably throughout this discussion. That could be CFOs, controllers, CEOs, anyone who's involved in the financial reporting process. And it's not necessarily just the stuff that gets audited. It's all the information that is used by the board and by the key management team members to make decisions around running the organization. So they've got a heavy load to bear around getting the right information into the right hands at the right time in the right way. And so by engaging with this group of people, what we're hopeful is if we can all get on the right page early enough on in the process, we can cut out some wasted efforts and we can focus on the key risks that are there around the audit. So one of the tools that we use for this is our audit quality indicators pilot, and we're in year 2 of it. It's probably not going to be a pilot for much longer. It's going to be a toolkit that goes out and gets posted in the next year or so, where audit committees and management teams can sort of pick from the menu and use some of the techniques that are hopefully going to help them build consistency into their audit quality. And the feedback we've gotten in the early days of this, in the first couple of years, is we've got audit committee members that are coming back to us saying, even though I do have an audit background, I was a former audit partner, even ones that don't have that background, they've felt that they've gotten far more transparency into the context of what the audit's all about, why it's important to focus on certain things at which point during the cycle. Other positive bits of feedback that we've gotten is that the three entities in this triangle have all gotten together earlier in the process and figured out what was important, what were the key risks going to be, and they just focused on those. Now, that doesn't say things don't change and you won't have sort of a course correction, but at least the other thing that came back resoundingly was no surprises. So really what we're trying to achieve with this, and we think we are, I'm not going to say we're there yet because we still have a lot of effort left to put forth into it, is that there's a bit of a pull factor being created from the audit committee level to say, okay, we all need to sort of be on the same page and drive this process together. And by no means is this meant to be sort of a make work exercise where we're suggesting that audit committee members aren't doing the job they should be doing, and it's more just around how do we efficiently focus our efforts and where do we need to focus them. So that's an exciting piece of what we've been working on, and I look forward to maybe having further discussions with folks in the room here, either later today over drinks or whenever. You'll get our contact information after we're done. So on to current and emerging issues. So I'll preface this by saying that I'm coming at it from a bit of an auditor focus, and I realize that there's only one auditor in the room. Thanks again for the invite. But what the auditor cares about, management and the board will also care about. So I'll temper it with that. And I apologize that I didn't flip my slides around a bit, but bear with me. So Bitcoin, again, cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, cannabis industry in Canada, and again, we'll cover the enhanced audit report at the end of it. So what's Bitcoin and blockchain? So Bitcoin, what's unique about this is here we've got and again, it came around and I think it was starting to be developed in '08. And again, I'm going to apologize here. This is my first apology, is that I'm not an expert in this. I'm just somebody from my team did some really good research and put together a presentation that we worked through. I'm still a student of this, but I'll give you some insights that I think are relevant for everybody in the room, whether you're a board member or a preparer. So here we've got a peer-to-peer electronic payment system that allows transactions to happen without a trusted intermediary. So we don't need banks anymore, if we take it to the nth degree. So that's clearly going to have banks very concerned because you're cutting them out of a bunch of business. Don't worry, they're very much into this, and I'm sure they'll come up with a solution for their own businesses. Again, that's not a slight on big banks, it's good business. The way it does this is through a distributed ledger technology across the internet that relies on individual users having heavy encryption and security keys. So basically I can buy whatever it is that I'd like to buy from somebody else in this room. I don't need to know their name. I don't need to know who they are. Don't really care where they live. We just need to be able to agree that we want to have this transaction. Once it's validated and done, it's permanently etched into that ledger across the distributed internet. And it never goes away. And I say never with a grain of salt because I'm not sure if and when the internet goes away. I'm not sure what that world looks like, but let's just assume the internet's going to survive for a while. And it allows untrusted parties to reach sort of a common agreement on a digital history or a transaction. So that's pretty groundbreaking. So should have probably started with this nice picture first because picture is always worth at least 1,000 words. So this sort of walks you through how this happens. And if you look at it, it's basically any distributed user asking for a transaction. It goes through a validation process. Once that happens, this data point gets bolted into the blockchain, and then we've got a permanent record and the transaction's done. So if I'm a preparer, why do I care about this? So if you're thinking about getting into this type of world, and I know maybe not all of you have thought about this, but again, it was a topic that we, as a general consensus, said we think people are interested in this, so we should talk about it. This is probably one of the few areas where, as a management team, as an audit firm that is looking at validating the financial records that are prepared by this management team around this business, where you are unable to audit around the system. So if we go to my last bullet point here, all of this stuff, all of these things are extremely IT reliant. So if you think about it as a management team, if I'm a board member and I've got a management team that says, okay, you know what, we've got a shell that's looking at rolling a Bitcoin endeavor, whatever you want to call it, a business into this thing, we should do this, there's good money in this, the value, there's a play here. I don't disagree with that. What you need to be thinking about is what sort of IT systems do you have to basically understand what it is that you're transacting? And what sorts of controls do you have? And again, coming from a large national firm where I've worked with, both large and small companies, it is usually the case. It's unless you're a PCOB registrant that's a SOX that's in the SOX world, it's very rare that internal controls is sort of the tip of the sword in the audit firm's approach around validating the financial information. In this scenario, again, you'll see a disclaimer later where I'm begging not to get sued and saying these are my views, not CPAB's. But in my view, I don't know how you get around. I don't think you can audit around the system. So that's something you need to think about. Do I have an answer for you on that? absolutely not. And again, it's my second apology. I don't, but I do think it's something you need to think about if this is a scenario that's being presented to you. Existence and occurrence. Again, from an auditor's perspective, how do I know the transaction actually happened? Did these folks transact these Bitcoins or cryptocurrency? Did somebody else? Are they their assets? That's something that, again, is going to be very system driven in understanding that. And from a management perspective, reporting out to the board to say, okay, here's the information we're giving you so that you can help us make decisions around execution on our strategy. They're going to be relying on that. So you almost need to, you do need to have some comfort in your internal control process. Safeguarding of assets. Again, back to my point before around you and I can transact over this, with this cryptocurrency, and we're all happy that we agree that there's a valid transaction. And the reason you transacted with me was because I had these secure encrypted keys, and that's my access or my hall pass, if you will, for those assets. Well, if those disappear or somebody hacks into those and they go to some other organization, those are no longer my Bitcoins anymore. And there's no regulator you can go to or bank that you go to and say, oh, hey, you know what? I had $3 million on account with you. I lost my PIN. Can you get my money back? It isn't going to happen with this. And it's not illegal. So again, cybersecurity is a huge issue in many organizations. It becomes absolutely critical in this. So if you're getting involved in this space, which maybe some of you are, maybe some of you are thinking about it, you need to focus on that. So anyway, the thought starters. So let's move on to something a little more low tech. Cannabis in Canada. Nothing new. It's been around, but I'm looking at them like, never mind. I was born in 71, and anyway, I'm not going to get into that either. So little timeline, a little bit of history as to when it was legalized, what some of the actions were. So interesting point here in the second bullet, Supreme Court sort of said, well, it isn't just the plant, it's all the stuff you can build, make, grow, produce with the plant, right? Which kind of makes sense if you think about it. Third apology, there's only one more coming. And this is to my team as well. I forgot to get the update on this, but I think this July 1/18 thing is moving. So, and I just recently returned from Hawaii, so I wasn't actually reading the paper yesterday morning. So I don't know whether that's changed or not. But again, we've got legislation in process. The one piece to look out of that is that, or to take away from that, is you've got things that are in motion on it. And don't forget that the provinces they could make further restrictions on what the feds have done. So keep that in mind. I'm fully aware that this is likely the more prescient scenario that's going to come your way if you're looking at how to monetize a shell that you might have, or how you might want to take your company in a different direction. So again, why do we care? Again, from an auditor's perspective, but management should care about this as well. Independence and ethical requirements. So this was an off-the-books industry for many, many decades. It's only recently gone down the road of legalization. I'm not casting any aspersions on anyone that's in the industry or doing whatever. It's none of my business. But you need to know who you're in business with. You need to understand what laws you have to abide by. And again, back to the previous slide where we talked about some of the laws that are changing, you need to be very aware of that. So if I take it from a board member's perspective, I need to know that the management team and the organization has a good framework around what space they think they can play in, and where they're going to, where the value proposition is for that organization. And I need to know, like, I'm not suggesting for a second anyone's going to want to do anything off the books or illegal, but you don't know what you don't know. And if it's law that's new and maybe you're unfamiliar with it, you need to make sure you've got the resources within the organization, whether it's through specialists or consultations or whatever, that you make sure you get the right advice around setting up your strategy in how you're going to operate in this industry. Safeguarding of assets. I had a client years and years ago in Toronto that was in the auto industry, and God bless them, they did They made phenomenal automotive seat parts. They did the left hand, the driver's side seat rail for 5 different GM trucks. And and they had every right to be as proud as they were around the product they built, because it never had a failure or anything like that. But these things did not grow legs and walk out the door. So when you were sitting there, like risk of inventory marching away and people stealing this stuff didn't happen. This product, I think it's a far different ballgame. So you need to think about that. So as a management team, how are we securing our assets? How are we safeguarding those? What are the processes, procedures we've got in place for that? Board member, what is management doing to make sure that we've covered this, right? The biggest one, I think, is estimates. And I'm not going to get into the accounting stuff because I think some of my contemporaries on the panel here are going to do that. But the accounting for this stuff is fairly complex. And actually that applies to the previous emerging issue that I talked about. I didn't cover that, sorry. So estimates are a big deal here because you're not just growing a plant and then cutting it down and drying it and selling it. It rolls off the tongue like I actually was a farmer of it, but I wasn't. So it gets into oils, teas, brownies, I think we've got in there, pills, whatever. So depending on what type of product you're producing, you're going to have certain wastage estimates, certain yield estimates you've got to do. And that's going to be, it's new ground for certain people because going back to my comment about it's been an off-book industry, I'm pretty sure the folks that were supplying this stuff, 10 years ago, weren't really that focused on internal controls and those sorts of things. It was probably not high in their list of priorities. So I think you got to think about that now. And I think boards are going to be interested in that. I would be certainly if I was a board member. If I was a board member, I wouldn't shy away from a company like this by all means, or by any stretch rather. I would those are the questions you've got to have front of mind, you've got to ask. And the other thing is you're going to think about use of specialists. And back to my first point on this, on ethical requirements and, who am I in business with? Where do these specialists come from? How do they know so much? Don't discount it. They're good information, good knowledge, respect that, but you do need to be aware of who you're dealing with. I think, a decade down the road from now, it's going to be less of an issue, but at this point, it's in its infancy and it's an industry that's trying to legitimize, and I think rightly so, my view, not CPABs necessarily. But yeah, so I think these are the things you need to worry about. Lastly, expanded auditor's report. My only message here is this is a bit of a watershed moment, and well, I'll park my next thought for a second. So it's a bit of a watershed moment in that this is the first auditing standard that's come into place where management has a role to play. If you think about all the other auditing standards that have come since, 19 whenever, or 18 something or other, the auditor can come in and say, this is what we have to do. These are the rules we've got to live by. We do this work. Management hopefully will agree or at least come to some alignment with it. But if they disagree, oh well, you sort of agree to disagree and you drive on. Here we're talking about reporting where firms are going to report on key audit matters. And if I've had a reasonable amount of experience with audit committee members, boards, management teams. They're not going to just accept what the audit firm says is a key audit matter. They're going to want to weigh in on that, right? You folks need, sorry, and I'm kind of putting them again. I don't mean, it's collaborative, right? Everyone's working together here. But you're going to have a conversation about that and understand it, right? My only message here is don't leave it till the last minute. Talk about it early. Whether you have early meetings with your auditor or not, fine. Talk about this one. Now, the other thing that I almost didn't want to say to you folks, but I respect you enough to actually do say it, is if you're in sort of an early stage exploration type company or you're in a very low complex environment, it's entirely possible that this is going to run to boilerplate. It's entirely possible this is going to run to boilerplate for even large companies because when lawyers get involved, it gets very tricky as to who gets to say what about whomever's key accounting matters or auditing matters, rather. Even if you're in that situation, I would strongly encourage you to at least have the conversation about what it means in the context of your reporting issue or situation. You may very well find that there's not a lot of editing to do this report, and it's going to be 6 pages instead of 2, and it's got very little value for you and your stakeholders, and that would be unfortunate if that's where you end up, but you owe yourself the effort to just spend half an hour to have that conversation and start early on it. Here's the disclaimer, which says basically these are all my opinions, not CPAB's. Please don't sue me. Won't be taking any legal responsibility. Anyway, I've paraphrased. And most important slide, here are all the folks that reside in Vancouver that are your contact resources. They're all excellent people. Very proud to call them my coworkers. Very happy to be working with them, and you may have relationships with some of them already, but I do encourage you to reach out to myself if you want to talk about any of this stuff further, any other issues that are burning in your head around audit quality or just auditing in general, or what it is that we do at CPAB if I haven't covered that enough today. So that's it.